Neuroscientist Marc Lewis says the disease model of addiction isn't just wrong, but that it has become an obstacle to healing. And he details it all in his new book. It is called The Biology of Desire. And with that, we welcome Marc Lewis to our studio. Hi.
Hi there.
Welcome back. You haven't been here for a couple of years. New book out. Way to go.
2 years, new book.
Okay, so this book is all about addiction, and it approaches it somewhat differently from the normal ways we're used to talking about addiction. So let's really start at the beginning. How do you define addiction?
Okay, so the subtitle of the book, The Biology of Desire, Why Addiction is Not a Disease. And that's the theme. Although I use stories of people's addictions in quite a lot of detail to tell the human story, but I also tell the neuroscientific story. And the basic message, the disease model is very prominent. It comes from doctors and psychiatrists and scientists at NIH, which funds 90% of the addiction research in the world.
National Institute of Health.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because you don't bite the hand that feeds you in the funding world. So people keep looking at cellular mechanisms and saying, okay, well, this is wrong and this is different. And actually what's happening is the brain is changing in addiction. And it changes a lot in addiction. But it changes a lot when you learn anything that is profound and intensely motivating. The brain changes when you get married, or when you fall in love, or when you have kids, or when you become a religious fanatic, or when you become a sports fan, because the brain is supposed to change.
Okay, there's so much that you've just said in that 1 minute there, Marc. So let's break down. We'll talk about how the brain changes with addiction. But okay, if addiction is not a disease, what is it?
What is it? That's the question. It's a learning phenomenon. It's an intense, deep habit which is developed like any other habit through learning. I mean, that's how we develop our habits. And some habits become deeply ingrained. Often habits of relationship become deeply ingrained. So when we fall in love and we have a partner, and those habits they're there for a long time, even for life, even after if you've had a separation, they're still there. In addiction, the habits have to do with seeking a particular substance or activity, and we have to recognize it's not just about drugs and booze, it's also gambling and sex addiction and porn addiction and eating disorders. Quite a few eating disorders also cross into the definition. So what you're learning is a particular way of conceptualizing what's rewarding, conceptualizing this is what I need, this is what I want, this is what I have to do, this is what makes me feel okay. And when that repeats over and over again, driven by strong emotions, because they're strong emotions, and that's partly what drives the repetition, you're building synaptic networks. As I say, that happens in learning in general.
So it's learned behavior. So
Yeah.
we accept that as a premise. That's the premise that you put forth.
Yeah.
You, in your book, talk about 3 models of addiction: disease, choice, and self-medication. So we talked a little bit about disease. Let's talk about choice and self-medication.
Often the choice model is put as the diametric opposite of the disease model. Either you have a disease and you can't help it, or you have a choice and you can help it, and it's basically your own fault. That's way too simplistic. And choice is not objective, it's not rational, it's not logical. A lot of I just, riding in the taxi on the way here, we made so many choices that were not logical, right?
Meaning you got lost, yes.
Yeah, you got lost, and should we take this street or that? There's too many cars there, let's go this way, and choices like that. So the mind is not very often rational, and we often do things because of context, associations, motivation, mood. All these things affect our choices. So yes, addiction is a choice to a degree, but it's a choice that is constrained by deep learning and associations and strong emotions. So the third model, self-medication.
Yeah.
Keep going?
Keep going.
Keep going. I buy that. I think that corresponds with the learning model quite well, because self-medication means that people who've experienced often neglect or rejection or trauma or other psychological nastiness in their early years, childhood and adolescence, they come out depressed and they come out anxious. Or they have PTSD. I mean, it can be clinical or it can be subclinical, but one way or another, they're not feeling good. They're not feeling happy, they're not feeling whole, they're not feeling complete, and so they try stuff and something makes them feel better. And that's self-medication. You keep on trying it, and you keep on doing it because it keeps making you feel better, and presto, you're addicted.
All right. So you started off this conversation about talking about how the medical establishment prefers to see the addiction as a disease, and the self-interest of that for them.
It's not entirely self-interest. I mean, these are sincere people, generally, who really see it that way. My training was in developmental psychology, so I see a lot of mental and emotional phenomena as developmental, as arising out of childhood. These guys are doctors and psychiatrists. They see things in terms of pathology, and pathology is approached through diagnostic categories. So you put something in a category, and we have the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, which says, okay, if you have this, 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 and this, then you have a substance use disorder. So that's the way they think. It's not that they're, you know, some evil clan, but there are harmful effects, I think, quite harmful effects, especially in the treatment community.
Like what?
The disease model is the basic flagship it's the banner waved by most rehab centers throughout North America, throughout the world. They say, this is a disease, you have a disease. The NIH defines it as a chronic brain disease. Well, what do you do when you have a chronic disease? You have to go and get it treated. So they bring people in the door, and this is where the problem is. They're charging sometimes vast amounts of money, 10 to 100,000 bucks a month in the US, even more. And then the person is sent home after 30 days or 60 days, and they're back in their lonely little apartment in Pittsburgh or whatever, Guelph, and they start using again. So there's a very serious revolving door problem. People come back to rehab again and again and again and again. And part of the reason for that is that the whole conceptualization of treatment is just wrong.
I want to talk about the person at the center of this. We talk about drug addiction and treatment so much. We rarely talk about the addict, him or herself.
True.
When we apply the disease model, that approach to it, is that useful for the addict to look at it that way?
No, I get emails like several times a week. I got one this morning saying, thank you so much. I never felt like I had a disease. I felt like I was cursed for life because I could never get rid of it, and I felt like I could never be free of it. And truly, I'm not trying to boast. I'm just trying to say that this is a dynamic. This is a phenomenon.
So what did this person tell you it felt like to them?
It felt wrong to be told I had a disease. It felt encumbering. It felt like being chained down to a disease diagnostic label. And the idea of chronicity, and this is partly reinforced by the 12-step programs, which tell you you have to keep controlling and fighting this thing for the rest of your life. Well, she didn't feel happy about that. She thanked me for the book. She says, your model makes me feel free and happy, and I feel I have done the things I need to do. I can go on with my life. I don't have to carry this weight with me. They're very touching. I get that a lot.
You get that a lot?
Yeah. I mean, it's self-selecting, obviously. The people who don't agree probably aren't going to email me, but for her and for many of the people that I talk to, I talk to thousands of addicts through my blogging and emailing and stuff, and a lot of them don't feel they have a disease, and they feel the weight of that diagnosis as being counterproductive because they don't feel, I can't get over it. It's a burden. It's a burden, yeah. I have to do what I'm told by the doctors, so you become a patient, which means you become passive. When you're passive, you do what you're told, you do what an authority tells you to do, and there are only a few medications actually that are available and that do anything at all. But the most important thing for recovering from addiction is self-empowerment. Is being able to feel like I can change my life, I can do this. And that, I think, gets really, really quashed by the whole disease philosophy.
Right, okay. You're a neuroscientist. I want to talk about the brain, and you tipped your hat to that earlier. There has been much research about what is going on physiologically in your brain when you are addicted to drugs. Tell me about what you have learned about what is happening. I'm on drugs, I'm addicted to drugs, I'm an addict. What's happening in my brain?
What's happening is that when you get any kind of cues or stimuli or memories or imaginations about cocaine or alcohol or getting a drink or sex or gambling or whatever it is, you get dopamine, a particular neuromodulator, neurotransmitter, comes up from the midbrain, goes up to a place called the striatum, which is a very old part of the brain designed for seeking goals. And it focuses attention, it collapses attention into a kind of a narrow beam, and it produces motivation, attraction, a push toward the goal, because that's how we mammals, achieve our goals. So each time that happens, the striatum gets wired up a little bit more, because all brain regions, when they get used, you get synaptic changes. You get changes in the synapses. The synapses that are used get strengthened. The synapses that are not used get weakened. So the ones that correspond to the drug or drink or whatever, gambling, whatever it is, those synapses become more and more entrained, connected, reinforced, strengthened. You get these highways that continually get reinforced by the dopamine uptake. And that's basically all you can think about. That's what I need, that's what I want, that's all I can think about.
Your brain, the rest of your brain shuts off.
It doesn't shut off entirely, but some of the other things that you used to be very attracted to, your pets, your family, your movie night, pizza, whatever, just falls off the edge because you're not pursuing those things very much. So the synapses that are representing those activities become weakened. And so in that sense, yes, there's less of the rest and a lot of focus on this one thing.
All right, Mark, if that's what is happening inside an addicted brain, that sort of trap door almost that keeps you really focused, is the same thing happening in my brain if I use drugs recreationally, that those synapses shutting down, the ones that were firing being fired more often?
Yeah, it's complicated.
It's the
course,
brain.
It's the brain. The other thing that happens in addiction is the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, becomes less connected when you're pursuing drugs. Why? Because the behavior becomes automatic. With any automatic behavior, driving your car, whatever it is, you don't need to think. And so there's a kind of a shutdown of some of these synaptic pathways as well, which means you lose perspective. And that loss of perspective is really an insidious thing. When you lose perspective, you're really only living for the moment, and you're not able to sort of see the future and not able to think about how is this worth it, because next week I'm just going to be in the same situation. When people use drugs recreationally, that's not happening. It's just none of it is happening. I mean, they use drugs recreationally like people do social drinking. It's one of an ensemble of rewards that you can
Except
enjoy.
for many people, isn't there that that line that you start recreationally and then it leads to addiction? I mean, so where does your brain switch?
The stats show that about 85% of people who use drugs don't get addicted.
85%?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't get addicted.
Okay.
So of those who do get addicted, and they're the ones we worry about, of course, most of them get better. The majority get better. And of those who get better, the majority of those get better without formal treatment. These stats are all available online. I'm not making it up.
Okay.
So although addiction is insidious and dangerous and it destroys lives, and we have to, of course, think of better and better ways to help addicts, it's not like this evil curse that descends on you like in Snow White and, it's suddenly you're asleep for 100 years. It's not magical.
I like that you're mixing up your fairy tales, by the way, but that's okay.
My metaphor.
Fair enough. Okay, I don't recall the stats that you just put out, but a number of people statistically recover from drug addiction.
Yes.
It's that word I want to focus on and I want to stick with the brain. If your brain does that when you're addicted, what is happening to your brain when you're in recovery?
Good question. You continue learning. The first thing that happens is that the thing that you're attracted to becomes repellent.
Okay.
And that can happen, obviously, in stages. I mean, it may take time. This is wrecking my life. This is wrecking my marriage. This is getting me in all kinds of trouble. I'm starting to hate this. I do it every day. It's boring. It's stupid. It's disgusting. I want to stop. I want to be free of it. Now you have a new desire, a desire to move in another direction, and you have less desire over there. As those scales rebalance, you start to learn methods for self-control that you haven't used for a long time, perhaps. So again, it's synaptic wiring, right? It's always synaptic wiring. And some of the regions actually of prefrontal cortex that I was talking about before, those thinking regions, come online when the drug urge hits. So, okay, this is bad for me, start thinking about something else. Okay, and now you're setting up a traffic flow again between the prefrontal cortex and the striatum, that motivational part. And that traffic flow is starting to make you, help you with all the skills and self-regulation abilities that you need to develop the habit of abstaining. And that's a habit too.
So learned behavior to abstain.
Yeah.
Same approach.
Yeah, it's a learned behavior.
I want to ask you about recovery.
Yeah.
I chose that word deliberately.
Okay.
It's a word you're not fond of also when it comes to drug addiction. Why not? What's wrong with it?
It's a medical term.
So disease, recovery,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, so recovery means you get back to normal. You go back to where you were. People who overcome their addictions, the word that I prefer, they're not going backwards, they're going forwards. They're developing new skills and new ways of understanding themselves, new perspectives. They often look back on a period of suffering and say, I'm glad I went through it. I'm a deeper, fuller person. I understand myself better now. I know my limits and I know where I want to go and who I want to be. So I don't think of it as recovering and going backwards. I think of it as further development, growth.
Okay, so that goes back to your point earlier about empowerment of the individual.
Absolutely.
And that's a good segue, because you write about real people in real time in this book. So there's Brian, who, if we had more time, I would ask you about him. But I want to talk about Alice. Alice is someone who has anorexia. And at the top of our conversation, you said, sometimes we assume when we talk addiction, we're talking about drugs and booze, but there are all kinds of addictions, gambling, anorexia.
Yeah.
And because again, anorexia is, you don't hear often it's seen as an addiction. You are sick. You have anorexia. You have a disease. It is called anorexia. How is anorexia an addiction?
But it's not a disease. It's not. It's a disorder, okay. It's certainly destructive. It's insidious. It's all that. Alice had anorexia for several years, got extremely skinny, and then and that developed into binge eating disorder, another disorder. But anorexia is really complicated, and I don't tend to understand it completely. But people talk about it as an addiction to control, or an addiction It's difficult to think of it as an addiction, partly because most addictions are about putting stuff into you. Anorexia is about keeping stuff out of you. But with Alice, and each of these chapters are in the book are really detailed. I interviewed these people over probably 15, 20 hours each to get the, day by day, blow by blow. And she suffered terribly because when she got into the binge eating disorder, she would try very, very hard to control it, and she'd sit on it, and she said it's like trying not to think of an elephant. So it's like, you can't do it that way. And she would break down after hours of successfully avoiding, this is the binge eating part, she would start to eat huge amounts of guacamole and peanut butter and chocolate and all that stuff. And she was a mess. But it was, all the stages were learned, and started in her childhood because her mother was very concerned about body image, very concerned. And tummy size.
The learned behavior. This goes back to your learned behavior thing.
Exactly.
Okay, we have time, so let me, because I want to talk about Brian, because I guess in the, I don't know, the more traditional sense, he's a more traditional addict because it's not anorexia.
Yeah,
so tell me about Brian.
Yeah, so Brian got into methamphetamine. He got into it in a big way. He started using it to keep himself awake at night because he was an entrepreneur and he worked pretty hard. And then he started to like it more and more and became dependent on it in the way that addicts do. He went through 2 or 3 years of intense use, and the compulsive aspect for Brian, in that chapter I explore the compulsive aspect of addiction, and also this issue of what I was talking about before, the recurring present tense, that you can only focus on the present and you can't think much about the future, which I call now appeal. It was always about the next hit. Should I have one now, or should I wait for 2 hours, or maybe I should wait, and no, I better have another one now because I might start to come down. And he was thinking like that all the time. And he's an intelligent guy, and he became...
He's a guy, he knew it was intelligent. He was hyper self-aware. He knows the damage it's causing. It's what addicts always tell you, I know that it's bad for me. Like, I'm not an idiot.
Exactly.
He knows that. And just to put a fine point on it, yet he keeps doing it. So give me the why of why he does that.
It's partly because it's the things that we talked about so far, the narrowness of the goal and the push of the drive. The striatum is designed to make you go after things. So you feel the urge. It's called an urge. It's called craving. Craving's a big word in addiction. Craving is hard to resist when it's very, very strong. We might feel craving when we have a little, our children. We crave our children. You want to pick them up, hug them and kiss them and stuff like that. Well, okay, that's healthy craving. This is unhealthy craving. There's that. There's also a compulsive part. As the striatum continues to wire up, there's a part of the striatum where behavior becomes completely automatic. And I compare it to driving. You're not thinking when you're driving. You just do, you change lanes without thinking. And I would say he got into that thoughtless, compulsive phase, which again is not an addiction because it happens in many aspects of our life, but we don't worry about it because, hey, we realize that we can't be conscious all the time of turning off the lights and whatever you do and making your bed. You're thinking about other stuff. You do stuff automatically. Well, he was doing methamphetamine automatically, and that was the problem.
We only got about a minute left, so I'm going to throw a big question your way. It really doesn't matter if you're in the medical establishment, if you're a layperson, if you're a parent, if you're a kid, if you're addicted to drugs, if you abhor drugs. People want people to be healthy.
Yes.
So, what is one thing that we need to change right now to ensure that make more addicts be less addicts?
Right.
Is it stop the medical community from saying just don't treat them? What is one thing? What do we need to know?
First, the conventional rehab industry isn't working. Everybody knows that in the addiction field. Second, make treatment available when addicts are ready to quit, so they don't have to get on a waiting list for 6 months or whatever it is. Because when they're ready, that's when you can most manipulate that desire engine and help send it in a different direction. Third, help people be aware of themselves in time. They have a past, this is where they come from, this is how they got this way, and they have a future. So that defeats this now appeal. It stretches out this trajectory of one's life so you can actually start to think about the future and care about the future and move toward a future that you choose.
3 things in 1 minute. Way to go. Good book. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Great.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.